All right, guys, this is the final step of our final step. This is the final week of our first unit. And the only thing that we really have left to cover in terms of rhetorical analysis is to go over kind of the step-by-step process of writing one. What does one look like? How should it be shaped? What do I need to include in my essay? So the first thing that you'll want to consider is you want to remember the goal of a rhetorical analysis. What is my purpose? And it's not to agree or disagree with the text, but to determine how and why a text is influential or effective or not. Okay, that's what that idea of effectiveness should be somewhere in your thesis statement. You also want to consider the effective use of words that help persuade or influence. And ultimately, you want to look at how rhetorical strategies, right? Those techniques like comparison, contrast, narrative, cause and effect, definition, example, description, all of those rhetorical strategies that we talked about in week 1, how the author uses any number of those, and how that strategy appeals to our logos, ethos, or pathos, or how it creates some sort of appeal. All right, so before you write your essay, and you guys have already started doing this and done this, hopefully by the time you're watching this lecture, you have already considered all of these questions in your, they say, rhetorical strategies kind of assignment from last week. So you can choose any of the 5 texts. How I Learned to Love Snapchat, Go Ahead, Waste Time on the Internet, Blue Collar, Brilliance, Why 2 Years Are Better Than 4, and Why Men Can't Have It All. You've already chosen one of those texts and you've already answered all of these questions. But you want to really consider who created the text, who did he create it for, and why did she create it. So looking at the author, you want to consider the inartistic ethos, the person, the author, him or herself. What do we know about the writer, speaker, the creator of the text? Their educational background, their political affiliations, their investment in the message, their biases, any number of those things. And those things can be found in the little blurb underneath about the author kind of thing in each of the texts, that inartistic ethos. But you also want to consider how the author presents him or herself within the text. What strategies does the author use to kind of create this person that we can trust, relate to, and believe? So, but you want to look at the actual person who has written or created this text. You also want to consider the purpose of your text. What is the author's argument? Now, there is some sort of explicit argument that the text is making, and some of that, what you feel that argument is largely based on your interpretation, but you want to be specific. So, for example, if you choose to read the article or analyze the article, "How I Learned to Love Snapchat" by Jenna Wortham, her argument is not that is not all about her love relationship with Snapchat. There's something deeper going on in regards to her overall message. So you really want to look at the specific goal or argument that she's proposing, or in any of the authors are proposing. So you also want to look at who the author intended to read this text. And you can kind of, I mean, obviously there is an intended audience for all of these articles. And the best place to kind of figure out this kind of demographic, this age, gender, social, cultural group, political affiliation, is to consider where the text originally was published. So, for example, "How I Learned to Love Snapchat" was originally published by the New York Times. Who usually reads the New York Times? "Blue Collar Brilliance" was originally published in a magazine called The American Scholar. So who is that target audience? "Why Men Still Can't Have It All" was originally published in Esquire. So who is that demographic that reads that magazine? "Go Ahead, Waste Time on the Internet" was published in the Los Angeles Times. So who are the people that typically read those publications? And this may require you to do a little bit of research from the Google machine, but if you need help with that and figuring it out, let me know. I'll be glad to help you. But those types of, by looking at the intended audience, can kind of also help you figure out, well, what is the author's purpose and what is the author's argument? What do they intend to kind of show or explain or argue in that text? And how are we, as people who may or may not fit that target audience, different? And if we don't fit that target audience, does that make the message less effective? So those are all things you want to consider before you even begin writing, because that's going to help you figure out the other finer components of your essay. So you also want to figure out if there is some source of exigence. And remember, exigence is not this delicious eggy breakfast dish, but it is the reason that the text is written in the first place. Was it a specific moment or event that took place that prompted the person to write this text? So, for example, in last week we read "Why Rural America Voted for Trump," and the source of exigence for that text being written was, despite anybody's expectations, Donald Trump was elected president, and that is the source of exigence. It wouldn't have been written otherwise. So you want to consider if there is some kind of source of exigence or a specific kind of reason that this text was written, or your chosen text was written. So moving on, a rhetorical analysis is going to answer 3 questions. And the first one is, why are the choices, the rhetorical choices, the choice of rhetorical strategies, are they appropriate, or are they effective and appropriate for the intended audience? How or what technique does the writer choose to present that material? And so what? What is the accomplished, was it accomplished? Or what is accomplished? Sorry, I can't read my own thing. What is accomplished or created? And in other words, what appeal is created through that strategy. If you don't answer these questions, you do not have a rhetorical analysis. So, in your introductory paragraph, the first paragraph, you have to have three things. The first thing that you want to absolutely make sure that you do is you introduce your text, the article that you've chosen, and the author, and briefly describe the kind of text or summarize the argument you are analyzing with any necessary background information. You also want to have a thesis statement, and remember the thesis statement lives in the last sentence of your body paragraph. And in that thesis statement, you want to make sure that you make a claim about how the text you are analyzing uses rhetoric for particular purposes. And I'm going to explain that in just a second. So, what should my thesis look like? Well, I have here this kind of formula of what your thesis should look like. And I've kind of given you in the rhetorical strategies document that you guys worked on last week and into this week, I gave you kind of a formula, a very basic formula to kind of plug in something that will ultimately kind of guide you in creating your thesis statement. But you want to include the author's name, an adjective, the rhetorical strategies that you intend to elaborate on in your body paragraph, and that can be one, or it can be two, it can be three, right? I'll come back to that. A strong verb and the function, what's the effect of the argument. So for example, Martin Luther King Jr. provides a convincing critique of white moderation during the civil rights movement through his use of allusion to effectively call for unity and timely action for his supporters. So in here I have my author's name, I have my my strong verb, right? A convincing critique, right? And then I have his rhetorical strategy, the use of allusion. So that's the only one that I'm going to focus on in the body of my paper, through the use of allusion. And that functions, the effect of that is that it calls for unity and timely action. That's his kind of overall argument. He's arguing for unity and action from his supporters through his use of allusion. So that's kind of what your thesis statement is going to look like. Again, you can talk about one strategy, two strategies, and have kind of a paragraph. I mean, for example, one of Mike Rose's in Blue Collar Brilliance, one of his, he uses more than one kind of strategy, but his main focal strategy is narration. And he does this, and through his narration, he appeals to all of our rhetorical appeals. But if I just wanted to focus on narration and Mike Rose, I could talk about how narration kind of appeals to all of those things, or I can talk about the various different stories that he tells, because he tells a couple different stories. But anyways, so my point is that I'm probably making this more complicated than it is. You can choose one or more rhetorical devices. Just make sure that you have a place for each of them in the body of your paper. So your thesis statement is the last paragraph, or the last sentence that I should see in your introductory paragraph. I'm going to stop here and pick up with what your body should look like for your essay in the next video. So stay tuned and stay with me.